Hi. Hi, everyone. All right, so before I go to the smart attendance, make sure give it a second or two for everybody to log in so they can get the smart attendance number all at once. Just to remind you that your final exam paper, first draft, in all the classes, including this class, is due Saturday in the morning. So again, same format as the midterm. I write comments and send them back to you. And then we will also schedule a conference meeting time where you will either come to my office or over Zoom, whichever you prefer, to talk with me for half an hour about your paper, or more than half an hour if you're more than one class with me. And then we have a debate, but not for this week. We don't have a student debate. Nobody signed up for this week. So this will be the standard classroom format on Wednesday, where we just, divide up into two groups, pro and con. If somebody wants to sign up for a debate, they should, for today, this week, and because they haven't signed up yet, then they should send me an email and let me know as soon as possible. Because
Sir, I signed up a few hours ago.
Oh, do you sign up for a debate?
Yeah, for the one that is on this Wednesday, right?
Oh, you did? Okay, pro or con?
I say pro.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And so I'll adapt that. Are you back here in Seoul, in Korea?
I will be back later today, actually.
Okay, great. And all right. So
unfortunately, I won't be able to attend the full class because I'm in the airport right now, but at least I'm trying to listen to the beginning of the class.
Yeah. I hope you can write up your adventures and send them to the CUK forum to get them published. There's a lot of reasons for doing that, including the fact anybody that wants to go to graduate school, it really helps if you get publications, even as an undergraduate, if you're going to apply to graduate school and to be accepted somewhere and to get funding. Getting published is, and if you got something unique to say, like, for example, we have a student here from Switzerland. I mean, how many Swisses study at Catholic University of Korea? Not too many. You might be able to say something very interesting in terms of getting something published at your home university. I know it makes a difference in terms of applying to graduate programs and getting admitted with funding as well. So we have a chat function here. Okay, so Great. All right. So I think Kirill said pro, and that should be on the website. If not, Kirill, send me an email telling me it's pro, and so we will have me as con on the topic. Two South Korean democracy would improve by changing the ROK Constitution to make its legislature bicameral, with another house being something like the U.S. Senate, the French Senate, the German Bundestag, or the British House of Lords. And it really might be an interesting opportunity for you Korean students to tell us, since you probably know more and can find out very easily than I can, why, when South Korea was creating its constitution in the midst of the partition at the beginning of the after the end of the Second World War and the Japanese expulsion, why South Korea decided to have only one house of Congress, one legislative house, the assembly. Why didn't South Korea have a bicameral system like the way the French do, or the Americans or the Germans? Why, in terms of looking around at the world, particularly with the influence of the United States, they didn't have a bicameral system, particularly since the Japanese adopted a bicameral system as well after World War II. So, it'd be interesting to know what was the reason behind that. And of course, everybody's always thinking about the Korean War and preparing for war and the division of Korea, and that this might have the president was supposed to be all powerful, and in a wartime crisis situation, with the partition of Korea between North and South Korea at the end of the Second World War, probably is going to be part of the explanation. But since then, since the democratization of Korea and the revisions of the Constitution, why hasn't South Korea moved towards having a second chamber in the legislature? Or more related to this topic, is there discussion, you Korean students, could you tell us, is there a discussion in South Korea about, with the eventual reunification of North and South Korea, that might then be the time to have a second house, a second chamber of a legislature for a reunified Korea, so as to accommodate the significant regional variations and differences after 70 more years of partition between North and South Korea, that there are great differences between Northern Koreans and Southern Koreans, and that might be a situation in the future, in some kind of hypothetical scenario, where to accommodate these significant differences, that might be a hypothetical scenario in which a revised unified Korean nation would then create a second house of Congress, a second house of the legislature, a second house of the legislature with strong regional representation in that second house. But but before reunification, we will talk about this role of the second house, and the role of the U.S. Senate is the topic for this class, because we're talking about American politics and government. So before I forget, let me see here. Let me do the attendance number here, and the attendance number is 180. So let me go to the chat, put in 180. And I should tell you, the university is really pushing us to get students to come back to class. So, of course, students have made plans and beginning of the semester as to what they're going to end up doing. And of course, people are still concerned about the coronavirus. But if you are in Seoul, you should be coming class. If you're able to come to class, although Kirill might, I don't know if Kirill's going to have to actually be in quarantine coming from Ukraine. If he might have to be in quarantine, that would kind of block him from coming to class. I don't know. But if you are here, you should physically try to get here because that's the word I'm getting from the university. I think they don't know yet if they're going to keep Zoom classes in the fall. That's far away from now. It just strikes me as really unusual. We spend all this money on cameras and screens and software that we still should use it somehow. And we use Cyber Campus, and I'm trying to develop Cyber Campus as well to make it more useful, for example, for the debates. So making voting on the debates more elaborate through Cyber Campus might be an example of how I'm trying to use the capabilities that Cyber Campus makes available to make the class even better. But I think that the point is that the university, and this is an issue around the whole world, I think that it really makes a difference to be physically present in class. And so as charismatic as I might be, I'm not charismatic enough through Zoom. I can supposedly have more impact on you if you're here in the classroom, and you can have more impact on each other if you're all together in the classroom. Okay, so let's go back then to the notes on the normalcy book, and note that. All right, so let's see. Again, this is from chapter 7. And so chapter 7 highlights the role of the Senate. And of course, the Senate, that's an impressive title, right? We take that for granted. All right, keep that in mind, however, that the men, and they're all white, rich men that were writing the US Constitution at the end of the 18th century, invoked this ancient Roman body and its name to create name the second house of the U.S. legislature. And of course, they're looking to Britain. They're looking to the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And so it's not going to be a kingdom. It's the American Republic is going to be just that, a republic. So we're not going to have lords, and we're not going to have aristocrats. But they did borrow, obviously, from and learn from and reject explicitly certain elements of the important elements of the British Constitution. So the British Parliament at the end of the 18th century was, from what I recall from my high school education, that the House of Lords and the House of Commons were pretty much equal in terms of power, that they were. That's a gross overstatement. I just remember seeing that in my junior high textbook, that at the end of the 18th century, the House of Lords was still a significant body. And the House of Commons was rising in significance, so that today, the House of Lords' power in Britain, in the implicit British Constitution, is more symbolic. That's not to underemphasize it, because that symbolism is also tied up with the monarchy as the head of the aristocracy, the Yangban, the lords. And so it has a lot of symbolic authority. And again, since I'm all about symbols, you know me, I study nationalism, right? And that means appealing to public opinion, means appealing to people's identities. And that's involved romantic self-images of self versus negative others. So symbols are not unimportant. They're always very, very important. So when people say that the British monarchy doesn't have any power and authority, it's not really true. And the House of Lords doesn't really have any power and authority. Again, that's the stereotype. The House of Lords, as far as I know from my reading, is that the only power it has, it can delay legislation for 6 months. It can't stop it, but it can stop it for 6 months. It can pause it for 6 months. And that's about the only substantive legislative power that the House of Lords has. But members of the House of Lords include many people who don't really do anything. It's an honorary position, but there are people that take their position seriously, who do investigative reporting. They do investigations into issues and crises, and they issue reports that can be important and influential. Also, the top judges in the British judicial system are members of the House of Lords. So, and that's important, because of course the judicial system is very important in the British political system that doesn't have a single constitutional document like the US Constitution. But at the time when the American Constitution was being written, they are of course aware of the fact that the House of Lords at that time still had a lot of authority, but they decided to give it this name from the Roman Republic to the Senate, and I guess revised it. I mean, I haven't investigated to see if anybody else used that term, but the Senate now and senators are a feature of the French Constitution and other bicameral, that means two-house legislatures, and it implies that it was supposed to be really important, that somehow the wise, smart, calm people were supposed to be in the Senate, whereas the House of Representatives, that is the people's chamber, the people's house that directly elected its members 2 years. Remember, the Senate originally, when it was written in the US Constitution, these people were not directly elected by the people. That only changed 100 years ago, at the beginning of the 20th century. Originally, the Senate, members of the Senate The 2 senators from each state were supposed to be selected by the state governments in each state. They would choose who would be their senators. They were not to be elected directly by the people. So again, to make that point, along with the Electoral College, which is the topic of your final examination paper and whether or not it's anti-democratic, the people that wrote the US Constitution, they were very leery or suspect or hesitant to believe or view democracy as a good thing. They claim they're creating a republic. A republic is one in which representatives of the people determine the policies. And in writing the US Constitution, when you read the Federalist Papers, which are referenced at the beginning of the semester when we were talking about American history, there was much discussion among Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and all the others who were writing the US Constitution and were writing these columns in newspapers that were being published to try to persuade people to approve or vote against the Constitution. Remember, only a small minority of men were allowed to vote at this time at the end of the 18th century. And men with property, even if you were a white man, you could not vote if you didn't own land. So they're trying to persuade them to support the Constitution, and this fear of the rising mass of the population, they would look to historic lessons supposedly written down by historians in Rome and Greece, ancient Roman Greece, that the Roman Republic collapsed when despots and tyrants mobilized the mass of the population, the plebeians, on their side against their enemies. So, and the Senate was supposed to be a body that, again, you had to have one body of the of the Congress that was elected by the people that were allowed to vote, but the rest of the Constitution is emphasizing the need to make sure that radical populists didn't take power, that particularly would threaten the economic vested interests of the people that dominated the new United States. And a lot of those people, of course, owned slaves. Keep that in mind, that over half of the men elected president between George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, the first president, and Abraham Lincoln, the 17th, 18 of those 17, over half of them had slaves, owned slaves. And so the Senate was supposed to be an important body. And then that was changed with an amendment to the US Constitution. And it's not easy to amend the US Constitution, but early in the 20th century, I think it was I have to go back and check, to overcome corruption, that the American Constitution was amended in a difficult process to directly elect the senators. But their office, time in office is still 6 years. So they're 6 years in office, whereas the members of the House of Representatives are 2 years and the president is 4 years. And so they're supposed to be the wiser, less emotional, less more considerate members of the US Congress. The age to be a senator is higher than to be a member of the House. So the Senate has a lot of power. And so that's the framework or the background for this discussion. Democrats did not win control of the Senate in 2018, even though they got a majority of the seats in 2018 in the House in voting against Trump. But the Democrats hoped that in 2020, the presidential election would give them another opportunity to overcome the Republicans' 3-seat majority in the Senate. Again, just to tell you some of the roles of the Senate has to approve treaties. So if Finland and Sweden join NATO, the United States approved the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the North Atlantic Charter, at the height of the Cold War and in the early 1950s. And that treaty was approved by the US Senate, requires 2/3 majority. So it's in the US law that the United States must come to the defense of other NATO countries if they are attacked by Russia or whomever. And so Sweden and Finland are now evidently applying to join NATO. And that means the US Senate would have to approve amending the North Atlantic Charter to agree that Sweden and Finland can join NATO, even though Sweden and Finland are now members of the European Union. They're not members of NATO. And and that requires 2/3 majority. So 67 senators have to say yes to agree that Finland and Sweden could be allowed to join NATO. And evidently that's not going to be a problem. That will not be a problem to get that majority, 2/3 majority necessary, according to the US Constitution. The obstacle to Sweden and Finland joining is turning out to be Turkey, because Turkey views Sweden and Finland as allowing Kurdish militants, Kurdish nationalists in the diaspora from the Middle East to be too active in fundraising and political activity in Finland and Sweden to support the Kurdish militant organizations fighting for Kurdish self-determination in Iraq and Syria and in Turkey as well, where maybe up to 20% of the population in Turkey is Kurdish. And they view themselves as oppressed and abused and hated by the Turkish majority, the way the Albanians in Serbia view the Serbs as oppressing them, and so on. It goes on here. In November 2020, however, the result was only the loss of only one Republican seat. After Trump lost the presidential election, the Republicans' political cohesion disintegrated as Trump claimed he lost because of fraud. And that's an important point that supposedly Trump is now claiming this election was stolen from him. There was massive fraud, and that this, through his words, discouraged enough Republicans to vote who believe what Trump was saying, that it may well have contributed to the fact that the Democrats then flipped and won Georgia's 2 senator seats in January 2021 that had been held by Republicans, to take those 2 seats in the Georgian election system. Remember, the states make the election laws in the United States. So Georgia requires that the winner of the election to represent the state as a senator requires that someone get at least 50% of the vote. And if nobody gets 50% of the vote in the first round, they have to have a runoff. So they had an election in November 2020, and the 2 top officials running for politicians running for running for senator from Georgia, nobody got 50%. So they had to have a runoff election in January 2021, and 2 Democrats defeated the 2 Republicans. And that gave what we have today, the 50-50 split in the Senate between the Republicans and the Democrats, that then allows the US Vice President, who formally presides over the Senate, to break ties. That's where we stand now. In 2018, the Republicans gained 2 Senate seats to hold 53 seats. In 2018, Republicans were defending Senate seats in 9 states, while the Democrats were on defense in 26 states. But then in 2020, the Republicans were incumbents and had 23 seats that were held by Republicans coming up for re-election, while the Democrats had only 12. And unseating an incumbent, somebody that's already in the office and is running for re-election, is difficult. But particularly so is unseating an incumbent belonging to the same party as the presidential candidate. So, the places where the presidential candidate is the same party, belongs to the same party as the incumbent senator, it makes it even more difficult for that incumbent senator to be defeated. So despite the fact that Biden carried the state of Maine by 9% over Trump, incumbent Republican Senator Sue Collins won re-election as the only Senate candidate to gain success through split ticket voting. In other words, many Maine voters voted on their ballot for the Democrat Biden, but also for the Republican Collins. And even though she has been targeted by the Democrats as somebody vulnerable, she is quite successful in keeping her seat, even as Maine tends to be, overall as a state, tends to favor Democratic presidential candidates. Of course, she's coming under attack now because she voted to confirm some of these Republican Trump nominees by the Republican Trump to the US Supreme Court, who in next month are likely to overturn Roe versus Wade, even though she is a woman, Susan Collins. She's one of 2 women in the US Senate, along with Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska. And, but, you know, she knows what she needs to do to keep getting reelected. And winning a seat from the opposing party, oh, let me take a drink here. Winning a seat from the opposing party, it says here, of the presidential candidate who carries the state is increasingly difficult according to historical trends. So winning a seat from the opposing party of the presidential candidate, yeah, is extremely difficult. So there's a chart here, right? So split outcomes in presidential Senate races. So I guess that just highlights the fact that if an incumbent is there and is running for re-election as a senator, it's extremely difficult to defeat that person during a presidential election. If they, it's extremely, additionally more difficult to defeat that incumbent during a presidential election. Even if the presidential candidate for the senator's party loses, like Susan Collins, Republican candidate for president in the Republican Party, Donald Trump lost in 2020. So again, this Pew Research Center, I don't know enough about this. This organization has only been around, I think, 30 or 40 years, and they do a lot of work. They must have a big source of money. And you can tell that they have a good reputation because the authors of this book repeatedly refer to the Pew Research Center. And they do a lot of research polling on religion in America, religion, political views. And it's evidently quite authoritative. So, but I don't remember hearing about this until I went to Bulgaria and got my first job there in the mid-1990s. So according to the Pew Research Center poll prior to the 2020 election, only 11% of registered voters nationwide had plans to vote Senate and presidential candidates of opposing parties. So to split their tickets, right? 80% plan to vote straight ticket. In other words, I'm going to vote for Republican president, Republican Senate candidates. I'm not going to make a difference. Again, the highlight here is that American politics is becoming even more nationalized, even in state elections for senator in Maine or Nebraska, or that we're seeing the stronger and stronger influence of national demographic, national orientations overriding local constraints in the outcomes of national elections to national bodies, like to the Senate, into the House, and to the presidency. So it says after the 2018 election, only 10 states had split Senate delegations. In other words, they have 2 senators, one is a Democrat, one is a Republican. It dropped to 7 after the 2020 election. So red states are becoming redder, blue states are becoming more bluer. And one of those 7 states is my state of Ohio. And the Democratic senator is Sherrod Brown from Mansfield area, about an hour drive from my home in Ohio. And the Republican was Rob Portman, who had been George W. Bush's trade negotiator. And he announced he's not running for re-election. I don't know why. He's not that old. He's in the 60s. And so there has been a Republican primary to nominate and select through the primary election a Republican candidate to run against Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan has been nominated as the Democratic candidate for Senate. And Tim Ryan ran for president briefly in 2020. He's a Democratic congressman from Youngstown, ground zero for deindustrialization in the United States. And he's a Democrat, strong trade union, anti-China trade orientation. And his selection to be the Democratic senator candidate from Ohio was always known. But the question is, who would the Republicans nominate, select in their primary that happened 3 weeks ago? And of course, Rob Portman's not running So all these ambitious Republican politicians wanted to become the Senate candidate. And one was C.J. Vance. And C.J. Vance is an author of a book that I even checked here at the Catholic University of Korea Library, and somebody checked it out. So in other words, it's considered to be, you know, an important book. So if I go to Wikipedia here, see English, and Hillbilly Elegy was the name of his book. And so this is the book that C.J. Vance wrote about Appalachian valleys, and a big part of Ohio is in Appalachia. This is the poorest area in the United States, Appalachia, or one of the poorest areas. This is in the eastern United States. He wrote this book, and this book was made into a film with Glenn Close and Ron Howard, and I think the book got a lot of applaud. And the assumption was that this person was really a working class pro orientation, and he became successful, and he then became active in politics. J.D. Vance, that's his name, J.D. Vance. And he opposed Donald Trump when he was running for president in 2016. He called him many bad names. Donald Trump is bad, I mean, really bad names. And then he decided to run for Senate from Ohio to replace the retiring Rob Portman. And he was one of a number of nominees. Tim Ryan was the Democratic nominee who's running for Ohio as the Ohio senator. He'd never been elected to any office before, and then he became a rabid pro-Trump type person. And he was endorsed by Trump a month before the election, when he was running badly behind in public opinion polls as to who was likely to win the Republican senatorial primary election in Ohio. And then Trump endorsed him, and he won. He beat Jane Timken from my home area. Jane Timken is the wife married into one of these Ohio local Yanban families. Each state has its own aristocracy. She ran for Senate president. I thought she was going to win. Timken is a big name in Republican Party in Ohio and nationally. Timken family members are often appointed as ambassadors by Republican administrators. I mean, they're super Republicans. The Timken family dominates much of Ohio Republican politics. Donald Trump came to my hometown, my home area, Stark County, Ohio, where the Timken family is based. They make roller bearings, specialty steel and roller bearings. The Timken family, the Timken company. And Donald Trump in 2016 came at least 2, maybe 3 times to visit her and the Republicans there. And I thought she was going to be endorsed. And then Donald Trump said, and chose J.D. Vance, evidently because he thinks J.D. Vance is more electable, more popular. He's a superstar. He's considered intellectual. And she came in, she didn't do well at all. And she served as vice chair of the Stark County Republican Party. She was first female chairwoman of the Ohio Republican Party in January 2017. She sought to portray herself as a Donald Trump loyalist, and so on. And Donald Trump would not endorse her. He didn't endorse anybody but J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance came back and won. And so he was pointed to that as, you see, I am going to still dominate the Republican Party because I blessed J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance won the primary. Then, of course, other individuals that Trump endorsed in the elections that went on this month and will go on next month, we're waiting to see the outcome. So far, the results have been mixed. but Donald Trump still is the single most influential person in the Republican Party. Again, about 1/3 of Republicans view Donald Trump as a political Jesus. They love him. And so you can count on that. And so the question is, will he beat Tim Ryan? Of course, we'll see. But probably, I don't know. I have to go back and check. I think Larry Sabato, what was this? So you can, of course, I justify doing this because you need to use the resources on the internet. And what is he saying about the Senate races? So I'm going to make sure you can see this. This is Dave Coleman, Sabato, the editors of the book you're using. And so we go to Senate race and Ohio, and they're saying it leans Republican. They expect J.D. Vance is going to win. But that's, of course, in November. Even though Tim Ryan has been a congressman from Youngstown, Youngstown is in this area up here, for many, many years, that J.D. Vance is likely to win. They're saying likely Republican. So even though J.D. Vance has been criticized for, he's just a blatant political opportunist, he's anti-Trump, and then wants so desperately to become a senator, and Donald Trump favored him. Donald Trump saying, hey, his response was, if I refuse to support anybody who condemned me in the past, I wouldn't have anybody to support. Everybody's pretty much condemned him at some point. Most people have. So that's what they're predicting. So so let me go back then to the notes and put up those notes. Make sure you can see them, that the right screen is showing. Okay, so and of course, Ohio, as I said, Ohio used to be a swing state. The only remaining evidence that Ohio is a bellwether swing state, that's a microcosm or a smaller version of the United States as a whole, lies in the Senate race. That Sherrod Brown gets reelected as a Democrat, and he is I think the only remaining statewide elected official who's a Democrat. All the other elected statewide officials, the governor, lieutenant governor, the Ohio Secretary of State, the Ohio treasurer, they're all Republicans. And he is the only remaining, Sherrod Brown is the only remaining Democrat. There was talk about him running for president in 2020, but he chose not to. We'll see if he has a political future. Sherrod Brown, he really plays with this trade union labor Democrat persona. His voice sounds like he's a working class guy, when you hear him speak. So the 2020 election was the fifth election cycle in a row during which the number of split delegations has declined. But the 7 may overstate the number of split delegations because the number includes Vermont. So Patrick Leahy is a Democrat, but Bernie Sanders claims he's not a Democrat. He's an independent, but works with the Democrats. So the 2020 landscape, in key battleground areas, Republicans had the incumbency advantage. So incumbency, it's really hard to defeat a sitting senator. If it's going to happen, though, it typically is going to happen during the midterm elections, like the upcoming elections this November. In key battleground states, Republicans had an incumbency advantage, but the Democrats were gaining political momentum as evidence to their success in fundraising by record amounts. Act Blue was the party's digital fundraising apparatus, which is more developed than the Republican counterpart, Win Red. this is really important for the role of development of the of fundraising. This is the Democratic Party online website to donate money, for millions of people to donate small sums of money. And of course, they're really focusing on this upcoming Supreme Court decision to overturn legal access to abortion as a constitutional right. So NARAL is the one of the main organizations that has been promoting the rights of women, including legal access to abortion. And red came later in response to the quite impressive success of the what's this? I'm not okay. Let's see if it comes up. Oh, well, they're not going to make it easy for me here, and I can't really read this in Korean, but these are important, very important fundraising, digital fundraising institutions for these parties. The Democrats raised more money than the Republicans in almost all the competitive races, which is interesting, right? Given that you think that the Republicans are all more about the interests of the wealthy and prosperous. Out of the 18 competitive elections, Senate elections in 2020, the Democrats got 6 wins, including 4 that flipped from Republicans. But the Republicans still managed 11 wins, including 1 flip from Democrat to Republican. So in most of these cases, challengers outraised incumbents. Incumbents normally have a fundraising advantage because they have 6 years to build relationships with potential donors. Remember, senators are in office for 6 years. The Democrats, however, had Act Blue, which allowed the Democrats to capitalize on viral events to get donations from small donors. So, you know, they're preparing for the upcoming Roe versus Wade decision to try to send out emails and that I will get on my account, and everyone, millions of people receive, encouraging people, if they're outraged, to support Democratic candidates. Other events included the death of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was replaced with Amy Coney Barrett, the newest member of the, well, still right now the newest member of the Supreme Court, who is very conservative Catholic and is likely going to vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. Even in races that were not really competitive, the influx of Democratic money forced Republicans to devote more money to them to counteract the Democratic influx. And then outside Republican groups came in to close the spending gap. So outside means groups that are not part of the Republican Party election organization, the Republican or Democratic Party machinery. They're so-called outside groups. And these include super PACs, and we'll talk about super PACs later, that they can receive PAC refers to Political Action Committee, and they are incorporated according to US law, US taxation law. They are formally outside of the Republican and Democratic Party campaign organizations. They cannot actively and openly coordinate their political activity with particular candidates and parties. They can, however, take positions on issues and not mention names, but very clearly indicate in their television advertising, in their Facebook advertising, in their radio advertising, what candidate you should vote for. And those groups, thanks to a recent Supreme Court decision in Citizens United versus Federal Election Committee, which I think was 2015, they can raise an unlimited amount of money. There's no limit to how much money they can raise. And some of these super PACs are aligned with different political figures. Like there's one that the Senate Leadership Fund is a super PAC that's aligned with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, that's focused on, of course, winning Senate elections for Republicans. And so I'm not covering everything here. In Georgia, $500 million spent in 2 Georgia's two Senate election races that both went to runoffs in January 2021 because no one received more than 50% of the vote in the first round. And Trump was complaining that Republican Governor Brian Kemp and Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, were not supporting Trump's claims of electoral fraud in the presidential election, thus fracturing the Republican Party and causing some lost Republican voter enthusiasm to participate. A recording was distributed to the media of Trump calling Raffensperger on the phone and pressuring him to decertify the election in Georgia or to engage in electoral fraud for him. And as I speak, the state of Georgia is now considering criminal charges against Trump for his actions. And the political consequence was a close but clear wins for Democrats Warnock, Georgia's first Black senator, and Ossoff, Georgia's first Jewish senator. So Trump had really targeted Kemp and Raffensperger to be defeated last week in the Georgia Republican primary elections. Again, in Georgia, the winner must get 50% of the vote in the first round in order not to have a runoff. Trump had promoted the Republican, Dave Perdue, who lost to, I think, Warnock, one of the Republican senators who lost in the Georgia runoff election in 2021 to run against Kemp. And it was Perdue was the person that Trump promoted and persuaded and pleaded to run against Kemp, to take revenge against Kemp for refusing to decertify the election. And Trump even spent money, sent campaign money, $2.5 million to Georgia to defeat him. And he won by more than 50%, blew him away, blew Perdue away. And Trump also supported a candidate to run against Raffensperger, Jody Heiss, I believe was his name. Take him down, to punish him. And he, again, blew away his opponent that Trump supported by more than 50%. And that's been all the talk for the last few days. These are the two main people that Trump wanted to destroy. And he failed. He failed badly. But like I said, Trump says, but I got JD Vance nominated in Ohio. So, so 2022, here we go again. 34 Senate seats are up for re-election in 2022 out of 100, 34 Senate seats, because about every 2 years, about 1/3 of the senators Senate seats are up for election. Republicans are overexposed, holding seats in 20 states up for re-election. They are particularly vulnerable in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. It looks like the Republicans have elected, what was it, Mehmet Oz? I don't know if he's a figure in European television. He's on TV. He's a television. Trump loves celebrities. He's a doctor celebrity. He's Turkish. So his name is really Uz, with the way it's spelled. And he's a Muslim, but he's not practicing. And he was endorsed by Trump. And he evidently has probably won by like 900 votes over some businessman who spent a lot of his own money. So Trump could say, see, I got Mehmet Oz. Never been elected to office before, been on television a lot like Trump. I guess he used to pop up on Oprah Winfrey a lot. And Trump did nominate somebody to run for Senate in North Carolina, and that person won the Republican nomination for senator in North Carolina. So we'll see what happens in November. The Democrats kind of like the fact that Oz was elected because they think he's weaker candidate against the Democratic candidate Shapiro. We'll see, and that Oz will lose, and then we'll see what happens here. So it's mixed message so far. Democrats have 14 seats to defend in 2022. They include 2 who just took their seats after winning special elections, Warnock in Georgia and Kelly in Arizona. So Warnock is a minister. He's a moksa in the same church that Martin Luther King Jr. was a minister in 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And the Republicans nominated a Georgia football star, Herschel Walker, who helped Georgia, I believe, win the National College Football Championship back in the 1980s. And as a Republican, and he's black. And I don't think he's ever been elected to any office before, Herschel Walker. He openly admits he's had mental health issues, mental health problems. His wife or girlfriend have claimed that he beat him up. But he won the Republican nomination. So Herschel Walker run against Warnock in 2022 Senate election. What is the I've never checked what the Wikipedia site says about Herschel Walker. Up here. Oh, there he is. He's my age. He's an American former football running back, and he's all into Trump. He's talks like Trump, says there's no racism in the United States, no institutional racism. And he's a football star. And he is the Republican nominee to run against Raphael Warnock. So, Republicans say, see, well, we're not racists. We're not white supremacists. We elected Herschel Walker to be our candidate. Don't tell us we're racist. If you just say the right things, if you believe in the American creed, they don't use those terms, but that's the term that we use. Yeah, we love you. We don't care if you're purple, green, whatever. And we're not racist. So stop saying we're racist. Stop talking about institutional racism. We just don't like socialism and people that want to institute socialist big government policies. And so you can read this. They got a really nice website here because everybody knows you have to have a nice Wikipedia website. Yeah, so his wife accused him of hitting her, that he threatened to kill her. He put a pistol to her head. He had a restraint. So we'll see. I mean, after Trump got elected, despite, his comments and behavior over the years, why wouldn't he try to run? American football is to Americans what, soccer is to Europeans. He was a football star. So a question remains, how much Trump's claims of stolen election continue to fracture the Republican Party? These nasty primary elections, are people going to remember those campaigns and claims and statements about Walker, say in November? Will they turn people off? We'll see how much of damage they do. There's talk that Trump is considering declaring he's going to run for re-election even in the next month or two. But some advisors are claiming that he has been trying to be persuaded by his advisors to wait until after the November elections. Okay. So chapter 8, governors and state legislatures. You got a sense that state governments are really important in the United States for a lot of reasons. We covered how, for example, state governments control the criminal justice system, that I think there are 14 states that still execute people for murder as a state law, that states organize elections. And keep that in mind as I tell you that, I'm sure 99% of Americans could not tell you who is their state representative in the state legislature. I tried to check myself. Who's my member? And it didn't work. I tried to check myself. Who represents me in Ohio? So this, last time I checked this website, it wasn't even working. So 44641. I can't even, it's not easy to find out. Like, who is my Ohio representative that are making these laws? well, anyway, I won't waste time. So, state governments have, oh, gotta make sure you can see that. So state governments became primary authorities for how to respond to the pandemic. Consequently, state electoral contests became national foci of attention. I mean, it's hard to express this fully. I mean, when the pandemic started, Donald Trump was president. There were many people claiming that Donald Trump's insane. This person is control of the US nuclear arsenal, Donald Trump. He starts a trade war with China, and then the pandemic begins. And for many, many people, this was terrifying. This is a once in a century global pandemic crisis. Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He controls the US nuclear arsenal, and he's undermining the organized response of the US federal government to the pandemic, because his base enthusiasts are skeptical about the US federal government playing any kind of important role in moderating or shaping American social behavior, for example, through social welfare policies. So, the World Health Organization was emphasizing that the key to dealing with the pandemic was leadership. And so the governors of the different 50 states, they ended up having to take the lead in dealing with the pandemic. Donald Trump's government, Donald Trump's administration was disorganized, was emphasizing performative Trump behaviors to appeal to his anti-establishment base, making outrageous claims about how hydrochloroquine could cure the disease, COVID-19, the anti-malaria drug. That he made some comment on television about taking bleach that you use to clean clothes and to fight the disease. And of course, there are always some mentally ill people that listen to that, and they died because they did what Donald Trump said they should do. And he's in conflict with Anthony Fauci, the top medical doctor of the US government that's responsible for dealing with pandemics. And many people getting really scared. And so the governors of these states that had to step in. And one was Andrew Cuomo. And Andrew Cuomo was the governor of New York State. And he was the leading face of the Democratic opposition on a political level to responding to the pandemic as the governor of the state of New York, where New York City is located, of course, and where the pandemic really exploded in the United States was in New York City at first. And so he was on, his comments during the pandemic were the focus of national news coverage. His brother, Chris Cuomo, worked for CNN, and his brother would interview Andrew Cuomo would be interviewed by Chris Cuomo, and there was questions about journalistic ethics. So Andrew Cuomo got lots of attention, and then he came under attack and because of charges of inappropriate behavior towards women in his working in the government. And there was talk about who's going to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. Is it really going to be Joe Biden? He's so old. And there was talk about Andrew Cuomo. Maybe he's got such a national profile. He looks so effective in New York. He comes from a political dynasty. People remember his father, Mario Cuomo, who was governor of New York in the 1980s. Fondly, he's the son of Mario. And then he gets in trouble because of charges of sexual assault or inappropriate behavior towards women. And that left Joe Biden, that he's the only one that is well-known and nationally prestigious enough that maybe could take on Donald Trump. There were other Republican governors that played an important role. In Ohio, Mike DeWine is the governor. He's a Republican, but he keeps a distance from Trump. but he had a long history before becoming governor. He had been a senator from Ohio in the U.S. Senate. I think he had been the Attorney General of Ohio at one point. So, but governors really played a high profile role. But again, in terms of the role of governors in presidential politics, governors get a lot of attention because it's an executive level position. It's not like a senator. A senator, they make speeches. They may work on legislation. I was told by one of my professors when I was in graduate school that the Senate is not where creative public policy is usually begun. That's not where creative public policy usually is made. That starts in the House. The House is where creative public policy legislation is created. Senators, they get up and they talk and they vote to, on nominating and approving or not judges and treaties and the like. But governors typically get a lot of attention because they are in charge of an administration at the state level. So, but I can't really tell you in terms of just an anecdotal response about my position as a US citizen, what US governor other than Andrew Cuomo made a national reputation on the Democratic side in dealing with the pandemic. And it was Andrew Cuomo, and I can't think of anybody else. They're there, but they weren't as riding as high as Andrew was. So the point is, I really don't know who else could run in 2022 to keep the Democratic Party in power in the White House other than Joe Biden. Even to this day, Kamala Harris, she's comes under a lot of attack. She's claimed not to be very effective as an administrator. There is nobody else. Joe Biden, it's again a repeat of 2020. Who else are you going to have stand against Donald Trump in 2024? And it's going to be, I think, more likely than not, a repeat of 2020. It'll be Biden versus Trump, unless Biden or Trump gets sick. At the gubernatorial, this is the Latin term for governor, right? So that's why we use this term. That means state governor level. At the gubernatorial level, a true shift in power due to the pandemic appeared unlikely. Incumbent governors running for re-election had a formidable advantage. They could lead in responding to the pandemic. The one issue that was the top of everyone's mind. I mean, Mike DeWine, he was having press conferences at least once a week. I would listen to them on, NPR radio. His staff were having press conferences every day about dealing with the pandemic. Challengers really could not compete. Republicans had 6 gubernatorial incumbencies to defend. The Democrats had 3 going into the 2020 election. On top of the traditional benefits of incumbency, the COVID-19 pandemic generated omnipresent state press conferences with which challengers could not compete in terms of media attention, and pandemic lockdowns restricted fundraising by the challengers, right? Republicans, however, were much quicker to resuming political campaign public in-person events. And when they did, of course, they were greater at risk of contracting COVID-19. And one Republican governor did, Mike Parson of Missouri. He was forced to quarantine, but I haven't heard any reports about him being sick since then. There's a lot of talk about long COVID. Democrats continue to follow the lead of the Biden administration, maintaining social distancing with small and masked events and investing in digital events. Not a single incumbent was unseated, despite the vociferous debate of these governors' respectful performance in managing the pandemic. So there was a pro-Trump Republican politician that challenged Mike DeWine in Ohio, Jim Renacci. He had run for Senate in the past against Sherrod Brown and lost. He had been a congressman, and he ran against DeWine. And his charges against DeWine was that DeWine, closed down, shut down American businesses for a while, Ohio businesses for a while. Mike DeWine put restrictions on public events. Mike DeWine implemented these COVID-19 social distancing requirements, and he should be condemned for that. And Renacci went nowhere. He was completely, he didn't even try really to defeat DeWine. State election outcomes seem to reflect a greater commitment by voters to continue with the familiar, while greater uncertainty characterized federal and national elections. And this rate of success was higher than the national average of election cycles since 1946. So in other words, people during this crisis, pandemic crisis, they voted for the, more likely to vote for the incumbent, the person that was already in charge. The state legislative elections in 2020 were more competitive than at the gubernatorial level because of the awareness that state and national congressional legislative district boundaries would be redrawn from the 2020 census. So as I said, the state governments are responsible for organizing elections, including how to divide up the state into electoral districts, both at the state legislative districts and the national US Congress House of Representatives districts. And so again, these state legislatures, these state governments are really important in shaping national politics. State governments have the primary responsibility for drawing these state and congressional elections. After losing the US presidency to the Democrats in 2008, Republicans focused their resources on winning state legislative elections, and that really paid off. They hope to dominate the state governments in order to dominate the redistricting process. Redistricting means redrawing the boundaries of the state, congressional, and legislative and congressional districts. Remember, according to US law, the House of Representatives is limited to 435 members, and that law is 100 years old. So as more and more the population of the US grows, it grows at differential rates. So California, Texas, for example, or Florida are always increasing their population, but the number of congressional representatives remains at 435. So after every 10 years, Ohio, with its old economy, its bad weather, always continually loses a congressional seat, and so that Texas and Florida get another one. And they have to redraw the legislative district boundaries, and that's done by the state governments. However, the state governments decide how to do that. It's up to them. So in 2010, the Republicans won control of 20 state chambers. And Democrats had the chance in 2020 because they have to redraw the district legislative boundaries every 10 years. So in 2020, the Democrats had the chance to regain the advantage that they lost in 2010. Before the 2020 elections, Democrats controlled 39 legislative chambers out of a total of 98, including Nebraska, which has only one chamber. Democrats focused their efforts on expanding their control into 19 chambers in 13 states. 10 chambers, senates and assemblies, were their particular focus. The Arizona House, the Arizona Senate, Iowa House, Michigan House, Minnesota Senate, North Carolina House, North Carolina Senate, Pennsylvania House, Pennsylvania Senate, and the Texas House. And the Republicans focused on defending these chambers. Donald Trump, remember, is the president, Republican president this time. The challenge facing the Democrats was a difficult one. The Republican State Legislative Leadership Committee began the campaign with comparatively huge financial resources. They were also helped by the 2010 district maps that they had drawn after 2010 Republican wave. But also the pandemic is ongoing, so the Democrats also continue to follow the Biden leadership model by practicing responsible pandemic mitigation measures. At the end, not a single chamber flipped in favor of the Democrats. So they targeted these 10 chambers. They spent their money on these 10 chambers, and they didn't win one. In fact, the Democrats lost 2 chambers in New Hampshire. So after the 2020 elections, Republicans now held trifectas. In other words, they had control of both houses of the state legislature and the governorship in at least 23 states, while the Democrats had 15. And again, these states, they shape the boundaries. They gerrymander the boundaries of the congressional districts. So 11 states were have divided government. As of 2021, Republicans hold over 55% of all legislative seats. So I think I showed you this a long time ago, right? Gerrymandering. This process of drawing boundaries, legislative districts in a way to make sure that your candidates are more likely to get elected and re-elected. It's called gerrymandering. And it's named after this old map from 1812, in which I think the governor of Massachusetts, a man named Jerry, drew this boundary in such a way so that his voters would win this district election because the boundaries were drawn in such a way that his tendency supporters are overrepresented. And somebody said, this looks sort of like some kind of a lizard, like a salamander. And that's where the term gerrymander came from. So we're talking about who's going to control the gerrymandering process. And so if the Republicans control a state, they're going to draw the boundaries in a way so that they can make sure that their voters are going to be elected. So here's an example, right? And typically this is sensitive because of race and racial issues in the US. Imagine this is a state, 60% identify as Democrat, 40% identify as Republican. So you can draw the boundaries in this way, in which case the Democrats will always win for these 5 districts, or you can draw them this way, right? So 3 will have majority yellow and 2 will have majority blue. So even though the majority of voters are Democrats, you've drawn the district lines in a way that the Republicans will win in 3. Well, likely, because somebody can say I'm a Republican, but I could still split my ticket and vote for Democrat, right? And that would happen during a catastrophe, like an economic recession. And again, this was done, if you imagine this, for example, that these are black people and these are white people in Mississippi, or black people in Alabama and these are white people, to draw these districts in such a way that you can try to make sure that black people are underrepresented, even though they might be 1/3 of the population of Mississippi or Georgia. So like, for example, there's only 1 congressional representative in Alabama is black, even though black people are, 1/3 of the population in Alabama. So it says here, in representative democracies, gerrymandering is the political manipulation of elected district boundaries with the intent of creating undue advantage for a party, group, or socioeconomic class within the constituency. So back to and so that's why, again, why state control over state governments is really important. So 2020 saw 11 gubernatorial elections for governor, 9 of them with an incumbent seeking re-election. And the 9 incumbents were not expected to lose. 6 were Republican seats and they all won re-election. 2 were open seats in Utah and Montana. In other words, the sitting incumbent could not run for re-election. Sometimes states have limits to how many terms a person can serve as governor. Like Virginia only allows the person who's elected to be governor to serve 1 term. Then they have to step away and they can run again later, but they can't be governor for 2 terms in a row. So New Hampshire Republican Governor Chris Sununu, the Sununu family is like what the Timken family even is in Ohio. The Sununu family is in New Hampshire even more so. His pandemic response, incumbency advantage in his name as a member of the New Hampshire political dynasty played critical roles, including in fundraising. Mitch McConnell really pushed to have him try to run for senator in November, and he said, nah, I don't think I want to. Democrats tried to tie Sununu to Trump, and Trump narrowly lost New Hampshire in 2016 and 2020, but it did not succeed. That's an Arabic name. I don't know if the family is Christian or Muslim, but it is an Arabic name, a Lebanese name. Biden's success did not translate into success. Weakness for Sununu, who defeated his Democratic opponent by 24%, despite the latter's endorsement by Bernie Sanders. Again, Vermont, Bernie Sanders state. Vermont's Republican Governor Phil Scott won by 41% over his Democratic opponent, with the latter again endorsed by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent self-described as a democratic socialist. Missouri Republican Governor Mike Parson was criticized for his pandemic response, in which he refused to implement a statewide mask mandate, and he ignored social distancing guidelines on the campaign trail. He and his wife caught COVID-19, isolated for 10 days. Public opinion polls showed negative majority survey responses to his pandemic management. These negative results did not have much significance. He won by 17%. So again, just to highlight that. He was running for this I take that back. That was somebody else. So the point is that the incumbents, they are, particularly during the pandemic crisis, people supported security, going with somebody who was a known quantity. In Montana, Democratic Governor Steve Bullock could not run again due to state constitutional term limits, and he would lose his effort to win the Senate election by 10%. He ran for president in 2020. He was one of those 26 Democratic candidates running in 2020 that Joe Biden beat. And he was a Democratic governor and really kind of charismatic. Again, he lost in the Senate election when he didn't become presidential nominee. Of course, he ran for the Senate and lost by 10% again. And who else? Again, it comes back. No, there's no Democratic governor that I can imagine has any kind of name recognition comparable to Joe Biden. But to replace Bullock, the Democratic candidate was Lieutenant Governor Mike Cooney, lost to Republican candidate Gianforte by 13%. This guy won. He beat up a reporter. He acted like a good Trump candidate. He beat up a reporter that asked him a question he didn't like. He still won in Montana, a state of about 800,000 people. Gianforte had more name recognition, highlighting the success in business before entering politics, while condemning the Democratic candidate for being a career politician and government bureaucrat. Remember, Americans don't like professional professional aristocrats. Whereas in Europe, there's more of an expectation that families that are ruling families, they should be ruling families. It is a familiar charge by Republican candidates against their opponents around the nation. Yeah, I said Gianforte made national headlines by physically attacking a reporter for the left-wing Guardian newspaper in 2017 when he was Montana's U.S. congressman, which apparently is part of his charismatic appeal because he won re-election in 2018. Utah is deep red, capital of the Mormon religion. So the Republican primary election really determined who will be the governor. And the Republican primary was intensely competitive, including a scandal. The former Republican governor and presidential candidate, John Huntsman, who had been ambassador to Russia, lost in the primary. So the question is, there has been more attention devoted to Republican governors. There's no talk about DeWine running for president. I don't know why. Maybe because he's too old. Maybe because he lost the Senate seat in 2006 in election. He lost that seat. But there's talk about Ron DeSantis, Republican governor of Florida, Republican Greg Abbott of Texas, governor, running for president, even if Trump does run. And those are the two top names, Abbott and DeSantis. In the state legislatures, the importance of the 2020 elections is high. In 2010, the Democrats lost control of 20 state legislative chambers. Wow. And this loss limited their influence in the state and congressional redistricting. The Democrats hoped to reverse the situation in 2020, but despite major financial commitments, they failed to retake the majority in any of the chambers they had targeted. But the Republicans, in fact, gained 2 more in 2020, the New Hampshire State House and Senate, in addition to controlling the governor's office. And the credit for the shift appeared to be significantly due to the overwhelming popularity of the Republican Governor Sununu. He had long and strong coattails. That's the term we use in terms of how somebody running for governor or president, they also pull along a lot of other candidates running for office because they're associated with that charismatic governor or president. The Democrats targeted Arizona's 2 legislative chambers where Republicans held razor-thin majorities. They need to flip 2 Senate seats and 3 House seats. They aim to build on Democratic Senator Kirsten Sinema's win in 2018. She's the only openly LGBT person in the state that had been strongly Republican. So she's a Democrat, but she's been very disappointing to many Democrats because she acts and votes in a way that is very conservative because she wants to get reelected. Nobody likes to lose. It's humiliating. And she's openly, I think she's openly, I don't know if, well, she's LGBTQ. And then despite Democratic Senate candidate Mark Kelly's victory along with Joe Biden, the Democrats only won state Senate seats. So Mark Kelly is the other senator from Arizona. He's an astronaut. He was in the space program. He flew on the US space shuttle. And his wife is Gabby Gifford, who was a congressional representative who got shot in the head and survived. And she has been campaigning for gun control. So she got lots of sympathy. She continues to get lots of coverage. That plus his charisma as an astronaut helped him win election as a senator. He is being targeted for this upcoming election in November by the Republicans to see if the Republicans can beat him because Arizona is traditionally a Republican state. So, Mark Kelly. So there you see Mark Kelly is an American politician, businessman, retired astronaut for NASA, and he was Kelly's wife, then Arizona Congressman Gabby Giffords, was shot and nearly killed in an assassination attempt by a sick person with a gun. And of course, that's a big topic these days. People having access to over 400 million guns in the United States, including people that are mentally ill. And I don't know. Yeah, this is after she was shot, and she was shot in the head, and she survived. But which is, and so she's led this effort to control weapons. Before she was shot. I've never looked at this website before, but she's married to him. And that was part of his success strategy. District Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. I'm going to make sure that you're able to see this. So sometimes, again, these states can decide, each of the American states can decide how they want to do the redistricting process that they must do once every 10 years after the US Census. That has to happen once every 10 years. They have to count all the people in the United States and then redistrict the Congress and legislatures of the states. And each state can decide how they can do it. So some states decide, typically through a referendum, to set up some kind of independent body aside from the governor and the legislature to be in charge of redistricting. And they've done that in Ohio. They've done that they've tried to do it in New York. So they've done this evidently in Arizona. The Republicans control all 3 branches of government, but redistricting has been allocated to an independent commission. And this process is still intensely political and being fought. In Ohio, this independent commission has not been able to decide on how to do it because it has to be created by the state government, and the state government then selects politicians who get on the commission, and they fight like politicians, and they never can decide on what to do, and then they end up going to a court. And the court has to decide what to do, whether it be the state court or the federal court, because the federal court is interested because they're electing congressmen to the Congress. You need to elect somebody to the Congress. So just because they select or create a so-called independent commission doesn't mean that politics and gerrymandering stops. No, it doesn't stop. So it's still going on right now. The elections in Ohio are confused. They're being delayed because they were not able to decide on the electoral districts through their commission. So the judges have been intervening at the state level and the federal level. And I will probably vote again in August because they couldn't get all of this organized in the previous election that I voted for in May. It's like, despite Biden victory in 2020 in Georgia, the Republicans maintain control over all three branches of state government and will control redistricting, despite the fact that they elected 2 Democratic senators. In Ohio, Republicans continue to hold on to their control over the state government, but redistricting is supposed to be undertaken by a nonpartisan legislative staff. The state government has to approve the new maps, which of course the new map creators know. Despite Biden's win in 2020 in Michigan, which had narrowly voted for Trump in 2016, the Democrats were unable to take a majority in either house. And so an independent commission is responsible for redistricting there. Again, so I just commented what I just said here. What I just said is stated here in writing. The Democrats had higher hopes for Minnesota. Minnesota had not had a general statewide election since 2016, so Minnesota voters hadn't had a chance to make their expression about Trump. But again, they failed. The Democrats have failed with sufficient ticket splitting occurring so that Biden won, but the Republicans continue to hold the same majority of seats in the Senate by 2-seat margin. The Democrats failed to win North Carolina chambers despite the courts forcing the state to redraw its districts due to racial gerrymandering, claiming that the Republicans were drawing the district boundaries in a way to disenfranchise Black voters. That's not allowed. Any other kind of gerrymandering is supposedly allowed. The new North Carolina state legislature continues to be responsible for drawing legislative maps, and the governor has no veto power over the maps. But the North Carolina State Supreme Court, each state has a Supreme Court, has a 4-3 Democratic majority, so the Democrats petitioned to the court to review the maps. Biden claimed to be a native son of Pennsylvania, so there was Democratic hope that his win in Pennsylvania would translate into a major boost in voter turnout that would possibly flip one chamber, but did not occur. In the Democratic Governor Tom Wolf, who is not running for re-election, I don't think he's allowed to run for re-election, has veto power over the maps, and an independent commission has oversight over redistricting. So he might be term limited. According to the state constitution, he can't run for re-election. So that's why the governor nominee for the Democrats is John Fetterman, who was the lieutenant governor, and he likes to pretend that he's a big working class guy. So he wears like working class clothes, he's got tattoos, he's bald, he's in his 50s, he's big, he's like 6'3", he's got a beard, and he's running against a guy named Mastriano, who won the Republican primary nomination to be the governor of Pennsylvania. And Mastriano was one of the primary leaders of the Stop the Steal movement. He continues to claim that the election was stolen. He helped organize the January 6th protests that led to the riot, and he won the Republican nomination to run for governor. And the Republicans have been unhappy because they think he's going to lose, because he's the weakest candidate to beat Fetterman. Fetterman, though, had a stroke a week ago. So yeah, so he won, and he was present at the Washington, D.C. rally on January 6th when a mob attacked the U.S. Capitol. He's under investigation for his role in the January 6th insurrection. He's running for governor. He's now the Republican nominee against us. There he is, working class John Fetterman, wearing working class clothes and shaved head, and he's got tattoos too. We'll see. But I guess he had a stroke, but he's recovered supposedly. The governor of Pennsylvania appoints the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is not elected like in Georgia and Ohio. It's appointed by the governor. So if Mastriano becomes governor of Pennsylvania, he will appoint the official responsible for overseeing the elections in Pennsylvania in 2024. Looking ahead, yeah, okay, just going on here. Aside from the large investiture of financial resources, Democratic disappointment was unusual historically. According to one data set going back to 1900, an average of 12 chambers have flipped in every 2-year election cycle. So why, what happened? It's still a topic of debate. Certainly the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests were used by Republicans claiming that, well, you might not like Trump, so might not necessarily vote for Trump, but don't vote for Democrats because Democrats are under too much influence from these radical leftist Black Lives Matter protesters that say, defund the police, reduce the money for the police force. And that made a significant impact. So again, the Democrats are surprised that they almost lost control of the House in 2020, only having like a 7-seat majority, lost like 20 seats, or well, maybe 30, some number of seats, despite Donald Trump losing to Joe Biden by 7 million votes. So looking ahead at 2021, 2022, the 2020 outcome of state legislative elections puts the Republicans in good position for redistricting. 14 states use independent or bipartisan political commissions to redistrict, so state legislatures do not play a role in the process. Still, well, okay, I already talked about this. In 3 states, a hybrid redistricting process involves the state legislature working with a commission. In the remaining 33 states, the legislature draws state and congressional districts. 20 are held by Republicans, 11 by Democrats, 1 is split, and Nebraska has a nonpartisan unicameral chamber. 38 of 50 states will have gubernatorial races in 2021-22. They note here in 2021, New Jersey and Virginia had gubernatorial elections, and Democratic Governor Phil Murphy was up for election and he won, but everybody was surprised that he almost lost. And the anger over the pandemic social distancing requirements, it was surprising. So again, with this person, is he going to run for president if Joe Biden doesn't run? He might have been up and coming, but he almost lost. And then Terry McAuliffe, the former Democratic governor, he ran for this open seat. He was the Democratic governor previously, but he could not be governor for 2 terms in a row. He had to wait. He had been, I think, the general secretary or president of the Democratic National Committee. He was a close Clinton ally. There was talk that he would run for president at some point, and then he lost to Glenn Youngkin, the Republican nominee in this year. And people were shocked. And there are a lot of reasons, including the fact that people don't participate in this election at high levels like they do in the presidential election. That he was seen as being too willing to accommodate LGBTQ and other issues in Virginia schools. So he had lots of national public attention, political attention, and then he lost to Glenn Youngkin. So here's Glenn Youngkin claiming that he's a businessman, he's not a professional politician. Boo, professional politicians, we don't like professional politicians. But He was a businessman. We like business people, successful business people. And he defeated Terry McAuliffe to the surprise of many. This claim that the Democrats are too willing to critical race theory influences in schools. Okay, so I think maybe I have to shut down the computer in order to convert this file. And all right, so